Just because you're Japanese doesn't mean you can put on a kimono. A completely new skill you have to learn. Oh my gosh, there's so many items, there's so many different kimonos, so many steps to put this on. That's the charm of it. I wear kimono every day. If people say kimono is practical, no. I really like when you have it on, you feel so beautiful. Like I want to have this feeling every day of my life, every single second. Find a kimono and start it.
Welcome to Unpacking Japan. I'm Toby, and today we welcome all the way from Kumamoto, Billy, our kimono expert and licensed kimono teacher. Thank you so much for crossing Japan in this heat all the way to Osaka.
Thank you so much for having me.
Today we're gonna dive into your experience with kimono and how to make kimono, how to dress a kimono, and what it stands for in Japanese culture. But first, what brought you to Japan?
Oh, what brought me to Japan? That's a very long question, a very long answer. I think in the beginning, I'm the anime generation, let's just say it. So I was interested in Japan as a kid already. And then in high school, I was thinking about it. I actually wanted to study French in university.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. But my guidance counselor said, you won't get a job with French if you don't become a high school teacher. And I didn't want to become a high school teacher.
Why is counselor?
And we were talking about what other interests I have. And I was like, yeah, I like Japan. So I went to study Japanese in university. And then I did my studies abroad here. And I really liked living here, so I was trying to find a job. I found a job then and moved to Japan. And this is why I'm here, basically. It has nothing to do with kimono, weirdly.
So kimono came after.
Kimono was like an interest as a kid, but let me go back a tiny bit. So I was living with a host family when I did my studies abroad in Nagoya. And my host mother was a professional kimono teacher. And she became my first kimono teacher. She was wearing kimono so often, once a week or twice, even 3 times a week. And she always had her students come over and do classes. And that was so much fun to me. It was like, oh, you have to teach me. And this is kind of how I came into the kimono world, when you want to say it like that. Yeah.
So if you go back to your studies, you started learning the language, you were interested in anime, but then you didn't necessarily plan I really want to move to Japan at that time. Do you remember the first time you actually came and how it was for you to kind of, after maybe studying the language, to finally be here?
I came right after high school for 1 month to study Japanese in a language school in Tokyo. And I remember that I didn't like it in the beginning at all because it was so different. I don't know what was wrong, but I somehow didn't like it. I remember crying the first night.
Oh.
But I started liking it after the first week. It got better and better and better. And then I just liked it so much that I was like, oh, I probably want to go back one day. And because it was already settled that I'm going to study Japanese in university, that I'm going to study abroad was settled kind of thing. So I had the chance to luckily come back and start my life here.
You went to study abroad in Aichi, right?
Yes.
Was there a specific reason you chose this area of Japan?
So in our university, not everyone is allowed to go abroad to study. And you have to apply with the professor. And usually they only let people through who have a good idea of what they want to
study after?
Research on for their bachelor's thesis. And I said I wanna research on people who are foreigners and live in Japan. And Aichi has a huge amount of Brazilian people living there and working at Toyota and Honda. I said, no, Honda is not Aichi. Give me a second. It's Toyota.
Yeah.
And but there was one other big company there where I heard a lot of Brazilians living there. So my professor was basically just sending me there and saying, so we have this one university in Aichi where you can do some research on that topic. So I didn't even choose that. I just went there in the end.
And you were just saying that you ended up staying at a homestay there, right? So you got the very, let's say, authentic experience and not just living in your little student bubble when you were there.
It was so cool because one of my best Japanese friends in university at that time, she was a student of that university. And she was just for 1 year in Germany. And then when I found out I'm going to be in that one university, she was like, we have a big home at home. Do you want to stay with us? So I basically just stayed with a friend.
Oh,
yeah, it was so cool. And for her, it was cool because she still could speak German in Japan. Because she right now is actually living in Germany, is married to a German guy. So we basically just went the other way.
But you're still in touch with each other now,
of course,
many
yeah.
years later.
Yeah.
And that homestay was your first contact with proper like kimono culture, so to say.
Exactly.
And you started seeing how they are put on. And do you remember what it was about the kimono that got you interested?
I really like when you have it on that it fixes your posture. And you feel so pretty instantly. I think a lot of people listening to this and they have once just worn a kimono, especially I think females, they know how pretty it makes you suddenly. You feel so beautiful. And that's what got me really into it. I was like, I want to have this feeling every day of my life, every single second.
Oh, interesting. Because when you sat down here, I said, oh, this is nice. A kimono makes you sit straight. And I'm just slouching every time we record an episode.
Yeah, exactly. It really fixes your posture. I've also noticed that a lot of people think I'm really, really tall just because I have so good posture. Because when you wear a kimono every day, you cannot slouch down because it's so uncomfortable to sit like this in the kimono. You really have to sit up straight. And this is going to be comfortable then in the end. So you really get good posture after a while.
When came the moment then that you decided I'm not just going to wear the kimono because I want to be and feel pretty, but I'm more interested in learning what's behind this garment?
There were a few things. So first, my host mother was always telling me, if you want to know more about kimono, you have to learn how it's made.
Oh.
If you want to be an expert in this, you have to learn how it's made. She always told me that. And then one other thing was when I left Japan, because I had to graduate from German university, I had to go back for a year and write my thesis and stuff. I noticed that without a teacher, I'm completely lost putting it on. I could dress myself to a specific amount of looking okay, but I just was completely lost. And I'm not this type of person who can learn with YouTube. I need a teacher who tells me what to do. And that's when I told myself, when I get back to Japan, if I find a job in Japan, I will enter a kimono school and take a teacher's license. And one day, maybe I can do online classes like I'm doing right now, online classes to help those people who have the same issues as me.
So you kind of had this idea already of giving classes later down the road.
Yeah.
So how did you come back to Japan then? Did you find work to come back and learn kimono on the side as a hobby at first? Or what was your approach to?
Exactly. I came back. I was a translator working in an office job in Kumamoto. And while I was doing that, I was starting to study kimono as well. So I entered Kimono School. And after 1 or 2 years, I think, doing that, I also started to take sewing lessons in kimono. And yeah, that's basically the whole story. So I got my license.
So for someone who has no idea of how to dress on a kimono and what you have to learn at the Kimono School, can you maybe explain a little bit? Like, where do you start when you arrive there at school on your first day? It's like, okay, so...
So we have to make clear, if you say Kimono School, it's not the gakko, Japanese school. It is the ryuha school.
Okay.
So it's just a group of people that dresses a specific way. It's like you have that with Kendo, and you have it also in Kyudo. You have these specific different schools, and one big teacher is teaching you their way how to do it, but there are different ways how to do it
so
too.
it's like in tea, right? You have the different
tea ceremony. Yes.
Schools
Ura senke, omote
exactly.
sente.
So it's like a school of how to wear your kimono. So there are slight variations of how you can.
It's not a building where you go into and take classes. It's like you sign up for a group of people and you pay a teacher to teach you, basically.
Okay.
And because same with tea ceremony, you can take certificates and licenses in those schools. This is how it usually works. And what the school is starting with depends on the teacher and the school. In my school, I don't know if you know the super long sleeve kimono furisode.
No.
What the girls wear for coming of age ceremony, the super long sleeves. It's like the most formal kimono for unmarried women. And in my school, we had to start with furisode classes.
It sounds very easy.
Yeah, it was the easiest thing ever. In other schools, they usually start with yukata. It kind of depends. But in my school, it was like we start with the hardest kimono, and then you can do all the other kimonos as well. And you probably know that in my school, we did competitions on speed dressing, and the competitions were run for married women. It was with kurotomesode, that's the most formal kimono for females when they're married, and for unmarried women, it's usually furisode. So we had like two groups, kurotomesode and furisode group. And to be ready for the competition, as soon as you enter school, you have to start with one of those kimono.
So you basically enter school learning the most complicated type of kimono with the purpose or with the intention of participating in a competition where you have to dress it as fast as possible.
Yes, exactly.
So can you explain maybe a little bit more the furisode? What is this kind of dress? You said it's often worn by for the coming of age ceremony. What makes it more complicated than, let's say, a yukata?
It's not more complicated.
Okay.
And a yukata is actually more complicated.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's like right now when I teach, I say furisode is just a kimono too. It just has really long sleeves. So you usually, when you dress a kimono in general, let's say kimono, not yukata, you start with all your undergarments and then you put the first layer on, which is the so-called juban. That's like this white collar that's looking out from under my kimono. And then on top of that, you put on the kimono. The female kimono is one with two ties. It is a really long garment. It's usually your height. And so it's not dragging on the floor when you walk. You have to kind of tie it up and make a tuck on the front.
Okay.
That's usually shown under the obi. And that one is called ohashuri. That is what makes it a tiny bit tricky. To get a really nice and crisp and straight ohashuri is not so easy. And then on top of that, you would wear, you make the collar finished, and then on top of that, you tie an obi in whatever obi musubi you like, of course. And according to the obi musubi, the obi knot, you will need more additional items to tie it. And that can be up to, let me check, with juban, 1 tie, kimono, 2 ties, obi needs a few ties as well. You take them off, but you still need them when you dress. Obiage, you need at least 10 items that are not kimono and juban to actually put on a kimono.
So I guess when you go to school first, you have to really understand what is what piece and where do you or how do you use it.
Exactly.
That's the foundation.
Yes, and every school is using different items because there are also elastic belts with clips on the side. They're called accordion belt. And then there are elastic belts without the clips on the side. Then you have datejime, datemaki. There are so many different items, and each school uses different items. So you would just be thrown into a completely new world. What I always say is it's like learning and playing a new instrument. You won't be able to play your first concert in the first week. It will take experience, time, and practice to actually really understand what's going on, how the kimono moves when you wear it like that, what are possible mistakes you can make, etc., etc., etc. It's like seriously a completely new skill you have to learn.
What was the most challenging for you when you started learning about this? Where you really kind of were thinking, oh, why is this so difficult? Why does this have to be done this way?
I think the only thing I was really struggling with was tying the obi on the back. In my very, very first classes before I even entered Kimono School. When I entered Kimono School, I was already, this is going to be like this. I already knew what I'm coming into. But I remember taking my very, very first classes with my host mother. Tying the otaiko on the back felt so weird to me to do so much stuff on the back and lift it up. Because you really have to lift it up so it sits up high. So yeah, that was really hard for me to imagine what is happening on the back. Besides that, I think I was rather natural. I was never really bad at dressing.
Just going through the stages of learning basically and applying them. How long is there like a formal training where after a certain period of time, let's say the kimono master will say, you're qualified to dress yourself in a kimono?
So some kimono schools do have a curriculum. Ours had one too, but my teacher did not follow it at all. So you're supposed to be finished, I think, in 2.5 years, and I did it in 5, which is okay. I was not there to like speed through it. I wanted to take my time. From my personal experience teaching over almost 300 people, I've recently counted so far in online classes, what I notice, it's very individual. Some people pick it up super quickly and some people take some time. Usually when you ask me how long it takes to be able to dress yourself and it looks quite decent, usually for me it's like 10 to 12 classes, and that's an average usually. But if you want to get better from there on, how fast that's going to be, that's super individual. That really depends. I have some people still taking beginner classes for years now, and they don't even want to move on. They're like, no, I'm fine in beginner classes. It's like, it's just, as I said, it's a skill. And for some people, it's more natural and it comes really natural. And for some people, it takes way more effort to get to all these tiny little details.
Because it's all in the details, right?
It's all in the details.
I imagine for practice, you need to try a lot of different type of maybe material and different types of belts, obi. Do you need to get everything yourself? I can imagine your closet must be like full of kimono, which are big dresses, right? They take space.
I have so the tiny items like ties and obi-ita, they're called komono, and I think I have every komono that's sold in Japan.
Okay, a collector.
I'm a collector because as I already said, every school uses different things, and that is so interesting because when you find something, you're like, what is this? How is this used? I want to know how to use this. And then you just go down a rabbit hole. First, you have to find out what school is using that, how they're using this, etc., etc. So I have a ton, but usually you're going to just stick to your teacher's advice and buy the stuff they say this is good. That's also what I recommend. Stick to my advice.
So do what you think is right, basically.
I know what items help to get a better outcome as a beginner, but I also want to show people how to just use the super traditional things like no elastics, only ties, but it's going to take so much longer to master. So I do a mix in my classes usually, and that's also how I was taught. We did like a mix of those elastic belts, and then later on only doing ties, and then later on, also getting rid of some items that even nowadays professional kimono dressers definitely use. I learned the way to tie it without those items.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have to really go to the core of it to really understand everything that goes into this.
Yeah.
And for you, after your 5 years of kind of training, you finally had to go to this Furisode speed dressing competition, right?
No, you go from your first day of joining school.
Oh.
You have to join. There's no other way.
Okay.
Yes. So I think I was third place the first time out of 16 or 15 people. I don't remember. And then a year later, I think I was first. Yeah.
So how long does it take when you do this kind of speed dressing? How fast do people have to imagine you need to put this on? So
let's be honest. In those competitions, they give you quite a lot of time. You had 6 minutes from not even doing juban, from just juban is already on, and then you start with the kimono and do the obi, and you have 6 full minutes to be finished. That is for me now way too long. I think it takes from juban up 5 minutes. So I'm doing way more already. And I'm not using any tiny tricks. I'm really tying. So they actually give you a lot of time, 6 minutes. Yeah.
For me, we were filming for another project recently where we had to ask participants in the show to dress each other in a yukata. I think it took them like 17, 18 minutes.
What?
For someone who, of course, doesn't know.
When
right?
you don't know, that's
so
fast. Oh my God.
How do you put it on?
Wow.
And they had basically one very brief showcase by the teacher from the store. This is how you put it on. This is how you tie it. And then they had to figure it out, and not on themselves, but on someone else.
Oh my God. Okay. Yeah, no, that's even fast. You should take about an hour.
And for myself, I would have no idea where to start. Probably just tie something around my waist to start with. But after those competitions, you move on. You're basically officially licensed. You can teach others as well the basics and go on. Did you immediately start teaching after that?
I stayed 1 more year in my school, and then I kind of graduated from there and went freelance. Yeah, but this business takes some time. Mm-hmm. So I probably really started in the pandemic when online classes became way more popular. So I think my business really took off in the pandemic. So I would say I'm doing this for about 4 years now. Yeah.
And we were mentioning that there's a lot of things that can become like very deep rabbit holes. I know from looking a little bit at you produce your own YouTube videos talking about kimono, and you have your website, that you went down certain rabbit holes very deep, right? So, for example, I know that you kind of started studying the traditional historical kimono, the and the Nihon Buyo, right? The traditional dance as well, to kind of understand better where this comes from. And
so I don't do Nihon Buyo, but I can dress Nihon Buyo for stage, yeah. But that is what we already did in my kimono school. I was very blessed with my kimono school. We did historical dressing too, which is dressing in Edo period. And yes, I never stopped researching on Edo period style dressing because I really adore it. And then in 2020 or 2021, I started to do Junichidoi classes, which is like the imperial court gown, like what you saw at the coronation of the Japanese emperor. That is what I'm also studying.
So this is something that only one person can wear, basically, right? If it's for the emperor.
So it was one in the Heian period. It was a court gown in the Heian period. So all the novels were wearing it in the past. Nowadays, it's also used as wedding gowns. So if you find a place that offers that service, you might get dressed up. But there are actually only two big schools left, or there were only existing since Heian period. There are only two schools existing for teaching how to dress. It's Yamashina-ryu and I forgot my own Yuha's name. Oh my god, Takakura-ryu. And both of them were dressing the emperor's family since the past. One of them later on went on to dress mostly samurai during the Kamakura period on. And if you want to have the real deal, you will need someone who is actually taught by one of these schools. I'm, by the way, Takakura-ryu, so I'm trained in the real deal. Because I'm not quite sure if those wedding Junichidoi are always real. I don't know.
So it's like a more modern interpretation of
I think
kimono.
they're like an easy way. Like sometimes all the layers, it's like in total, it's about 8 layers you're wearing. So it says Junichidoi, and Juni means 12 and Hidoi means layers. So it actually means 12 layers, but it's not 12 layers. It's about 8 layers you're actually wearing. And sometimes they're just sewed together. So you can easily just put them on and tie in. Yeah. So
you don't have to layer them all. They're kind of already all built into one.
And I'm taught to really do one layer by one. And they are put on very different. You don't call that kitsuke. Kitsuke is the way how you dress a kimono. You call it ofukuage. It's a different way of dressing. If you're a kimono teacher or not does make a difference, because it's so different from kimono dressing that all your basic skills are not applying.
You mentioned that you're quite interested in like Edo period dressing, and also that, you know, the kimono is a very ancient garment that has evolved over the years. How different is it what we see today when we walk around maybe Kyoto and we see young people dressing in a kimono compared to the Edo period, for example?
Edo period. Okay, the problem with the Edo period is, do you know how long it is? It's about 400 years.
400 years.
Yeah, it started in the 17th century and ended in the late mid-19th century. So it's way too long. There was a lot of stuff happening in the Edo period because it was such a peaceful time, and especially the female kimono did a lot of development during the Edo period because males had their jobs. They had to go out and work, and they had to dress what was told to be worn. So you have to be dressed like what your class or your occupation is usually wearing. In Edo period, it's famous that you could just tell by what this person is doing as a job by just looking at them, because you could tell by the clothing. That is why male kimono seriously stopped there. There was almost no development. So what you see today with male kimono is basically the historical kimono, almost one by one. The thing is that the female kimono was looking like the male kimono, and now it's very different. And we went from the beginning as looking like the male kimono with a super narrow obi. The kimono is as long as you wear it, like a bathrobe, from shoulder down to your ankle. That's the length of your kimono. And then during the Edo period, the kimono became longer and longer and longer. So it was dragged over the floor when walking. So what you see on geisha or maiko nowadays, that is the historical kimono that was worn. I think that's done mid-18th century. It's when that was actually worn. And the obi became way wider during that time because such a long kimono, big hairstyle, and tiny obi would look really bad. Mm-hmm. So the obi became really, really wide and really long. And what happened after that is that a too long kimono is too hard to deal with every single day. You cannot live and work in that. Mm-hmm. So when we entered Meiji period in 1868, the kimono became shorter again. Now we have a length for females, your height. And as I already said in the beginning, you have to make a tuck on the front to make it short to actually be able to walk in it and don't drag it over the floor. And the obi also became quite a okay length to tie and a tiny bit less wide than we had in history. So in Edo period, there was a lot of stuff going on.
So it's a little bit like today, like fashion trends, right? So suddenly something will become trendy, like wearing a longer kimono, and everyone will start wanting to have a longer one, and then it becomes shorter again, and then the obi changes size. Exactly. What about like colors and patterns and all of these? Do they have, or do they give a certain meaning to what you wear? You were saying that, for example, for men, you can tell exactly what they do professionally by what they're wearing. Can you tell about a woman and what she does based on the pattern she's wearing or the color she's wearing?
So historically, yes, because the normal population was forbidden to wear specific colors and patterns, of course. So the normal population had to stick to blue, gray, and browns. And those were very popular colors during that time. But the richer you were, if you, for example, were a daughter of a rich merchant, you kind of could pay your way around those rules. Mm-hmm. So we have a lot of kimonos left from that time who are stunning. You have like big patterns on it, like big flowers and various colors. And you could just tell by that this person has money. But nowadays, this has completely vanished. I think especially after the Second World War, because silk was so cheap in production, suddenly, I should mention that no one could wear silk at that time, of course. Who could afford that? Mm-hmm. The normal kimono was usually cotton. And then after the Second World War, kimono became to almost 100% silk. A lot of people were buying silk kimono at that time because it was more affordable. And there were no rulings about what class is allowed to wear what color anymore, so people could go wild with it. So nowadays, if I look at someone, I cannot tell by the kimono what this person is doing. But if it's someone who wears kimono every day, I can tell if they're a professional kimono teacher. I can tell the other day, once I saw maiko, not in maiko dress, but I could tell by the way she's wearing her kimono that she's on the way to one of her schooling, or keiko, because you can tell how they dress. So a professional eye can usually see by the way it's dressed, this person does probably this kind of job.
I know in Japan there's a strong emphasis on seasons. Mm-hmm. And I once was told that usually you can wear a kimono with a certain pattern or a certain color about a few days before a certain season is about to start. So, for example, certain flowers will bloom next week, and then you will wear the similar matching color.
Thanks for bringing up my pet peeve question. Oh. Thank you so much. I hate this one so much.
You're welcome.
It's not true at all. That's like, yes, for tea ceremony maybe. Tea ceremony has a different way how to deal with kimono. I always tell that also my students who do tea ceremony, listen to your tea ceremony teacher. They do have their own rulings about what to wear when and what you're allowed to wear. But in general, when we just talk about dressing the kimono as a garment, as clothing, as we wear it daily, that's absolute nonsense, because in the past, no one could afford a kimono for only 2 days and then put it aside and pull out a new one. Even nowadays, that's completely crazy, seriously. So the actual seasonality in kimono dressing is, yes, there are flowers that bloom in a specific season, but you have different ways to style them. For example, there are 3 big rulings when we talk in seasonality. One is you can wear the season right now. Number 2 is you can wear the next season. And number 3 is you wear the opposite season. You probably can see that today my earrings are snowflakes. Opposite season. To make you guys all feel a tiny bit cooler looking at my snowflake earrings. But this is seriously one of the rulings. That's why you find so many summer kimono with winter patterns like snowflakes on it. That is why there is even one pattern that combines sakura, cherry blossoms, that's spring, with maple leaves, and that's autumn. There are so many different ways how kimono combine different patterns, so you can wear it in more than one season. Because kimono is actually a garment that's supposed to last a lifetime, and you should be able to wear it whenever you want to. Probably not in summer.
Yeah, it's very hot to wear multiple layers right now.
You just change the fiber, and then it's good. But
Really? Even with multiple layers, it's
it's like super cool, this one. So the one I'm wearing on top, you can see it's a tiny bit see-through even in the light, is a rami kimono. Rami is a fiber that's spun out of a nettle plant. And under that, I'm wearing a rami juban. That's the same fiber. And under that, I'm just wearing just regular cotton stuff. And rami is such a cool fiber. It just evaporates all the sweat. It's very, very comfortable. And seriously, in the Japan heat, you can wear whatever you want. You're going to sweat anyway. So
yeah, that's a fair point.
But I would not say wear your best lined silk kimono that is like 2 layers of silk, because silk is not a very cool fiber. It's supposed to be a very warm fiber. And then you can also wear lined undergarments. So that's already 4 layers of silk. So I would not recommend to wear that in summer. But yeah, you should be supposed to wear most of your kimonos throughout almost all the seasons.
Okay. You said, though, that for the tea ceremony, it's special.
Yes.
It's like a kind of slightly different rules when it comes to wearing kimono. How did this kind of come to be? And are they also taught at the traditional, let's say, ryuha? Or do you have to see specifically with a tea ceremony teacher that is then also trained in kimono dressing for tea ceremony?
So usually kimono in tea ceremony is not the main part of tea ceremony. It's the tea, obviously.
Yes.
And then you have all the pottery. And then it's also the wagashi. And there's so much stuff going into it. So kimono is mostly in tea ceremony only an item you use for tea ceremony. Tea ceremony teachers do have a very different view on kimono than I do. Because for me, kimono is the main thing of my whole life. And for tea ceremony teachers, that's completely different. It's just an item they dress.
It's part of the equation of having the right balance in a tea ceremony.
Exactly. So I think if you really want to look deep into that, you would really have a teacher who tells you what to do. Because I also only know like the some of the rules, but usually I would just stick to no pattern kimono, just trying to stay with a color in the
something
season.
Neutral.
Because you can't just make a lot of mistakes in tea ceremony. And I'm not a professional in that. And I think also a reason why the tea ceremony is so strict is because it comes from the samurai culture. We know that Oda Nobunaga loved tea ceremony. So it's like that was a really, really strict class that was practicing tea ceremony. So having this still so strict and stoic today makes a lot of sense to me. So that's why I always say just stick to your teacher's advices and try. That's how you don't make mistakes.
When you first kind of got interested into kimono with your friend's mom, she told you have to learn how to sew it. Mm-hmm. So now you also did learn how to sew a kimono. Yeah. It's a very large garment. Where do you start?
Usually you measure. So the fun thing about kimono is that, and that goes a tiny bit into kimono production, where you start is actually measuring the fabric you have bought and then making sure you can make a kimono your size. Because these are usually tiny weaving places that are weaving kimono, and they're not all the same size. Kimono do have sometimes labels of length on the bottom. Sometimes it's woven in, sometimes it's dyed in. It doesn't tell you how long it actually is. When it's written about 12.5 meter, it just means, oh, this is a kimono.
Okay.
So you will actually have to take your fabric with you home and then measure it. And then you have to calculate how much you will left over, because you put all of the fabric in the kimono. You sometimes leave max 30 centimeter left over that you can use for filling holes or stuff like that later. But usually you put the whole length of the bolt into the kimono. You sew it somewhere in. And then you will have to start out to start with marking out, and then you will have to start sewing.
So the first step is actually just making sure you have enough fabric for your kimono. Can you buy any fabric? Do you have to go to specialty stores to get fabric for kimono? Or can you just be like, I'll just buy this cloth and try to make something with this?
You can do any fabric you want. That's fine. If you really want to support Japanese artisans and have a kimono that's super traditionally made from the fiber on, then you want to buy it in a kimono store or visit. Weavers also usually sell at their ateliers, so you can sometimes buy there as well. I do recommend that. But if you just want to get started with trying to sew a kimono, you can use whatever fiber you want, whatever fabric fancies you. And that is also completely traditional accurate, because we do know that in another period, that's the 7th, 8th century, we do have leftover socks from that time with a piece of cotton fabric on it. Cotton was not produced at that time. That was imported fabric they used to put into socks.
Oh.
So using any type of fabric you can lay your hand on is like completely historically accurate.
Once you have your fabric and you've measured the right size, you lay it out in front of you and you start kind of measuring and like tracing your kimono.
You don't trace.
You don't trace.
You don't trace. So usually you cut it into bolt width, which is about max 40 centimeter wide. Depends on what size you need. It's very individual. I cannot give proper sizes here. And you first have to cut all the pieces. You will need 2 pieces, very long rectangles, for the main piece, and then you will need 2 pieces for the sleeves. Then you will need 1 long piece for the collar. It's going to be later cut in half for collar and okumi, the second front panel they have here on the front. And after cutting that, you basically stack all of the layers on top of each other. So when we say main piece, you just put the 2 main pieces on top of each other, fold them again, lengthen half to create front and back panels. And then you mark it out with a sewing iron. It's called kote in Japanese. And that one marks through all the layers. So you don't trace or anything. You just do really, you like push a hot iron into your fabric to make tiny markings that are really hard to see later on. And you will have to put the kimono together along those markings.
Are there specific rules on how you can sew it, or you just put it together as long as it's basically holding up, you're fine?
I would say just go for it. I think in kimono dressing business, some people can be super nasty, how you look and your hashuri and stuff. But in kimono sewing, like all the tailors I know barely do say something bad about your tailoring because they know how much time goes into it. So I would say stick to the right order. So you cannot put the sleeves on when your main piece isn't finished. You first have to finish off your main piece and then put the sleeves on and then the collar. Mm-hmm. So there is a specific order, but you don't have to be like a pro sewist to do it. You can just get started.
It's interesting because it seems that for a garment that's been around for so many hundreds of years in a country that loves to preserve traditions, kimono seems to be quite flexible and kind of changing along, and many people kind of having their own interpretation, their own way of doing it, and not be too strict with how you proceed.
I think that's a big issue, actually, that people think, oh, it's such a cultural thing. And I also know that when you ask like 100 Japanese, what is a Japanese thing to you, they're going to say kimono. That's how they identify their culture. But in the end, it's fashion. Kimono is just a garment. And we already talked about the Edo period. It's just fashion. So also the way how to make it and what items you're allowed to use, etc., is changing over the years and more and more. The dressing, because that's my specialty, has changed so often too, how you put on a kimono itself, what items we have to put on. So we should not forget that it's just fashion and not this one thing that's put on a podest in Japan and has to be protected in this one shape. This is not kimono. Kimono is a garment we wear daily, so it's fashion.
Because technically speaking, if you just translate it, kimono is the thing you wear, right?
Yeah. So that's another topic.
Let's get into it.
Let's get into the rabbit hole. Kimono actually means clothes. So if you talk to really elderly Japanese, they will talk about their clothes, talking about kimono. Kimono does not mean the garment I'm wearing right now. And people who are super knowledgeable, I'm not doing that, but I know it, write actually the word kimono in hiragana and not using the Japanese kanji for it. Because if you write it in the kanji, it actually just means clothes. If they write it in hiragana, they mean this garment. And the reason why this happened is that after the war, Japanese started to refer to this as kimono as their as the bafuku, Japanese clothes. And it kind of got like mixed up with this type of garment, you know? And actually, the kimono that I'm wearing right now is actually called nagagi, which means long garment, because it's the longest garment of what I'm wearing right now. And under that, I'm wearing a nagajuban, and under that, I'm wearing a hadajuban, and I'm wearing a hoseigi. So actually, every layer has a different name. And referring to this kimono is actually incorrect. But we're still doing it. I'm doing it too, to make it easy. But yeah, I'm also using the kanji for it. Also, I know I should write it in hiragana, but it makes Japanese stuff to read so much easier when you write it in kanji. So yeah, so you should not refer to this as kimono, to be super honest.
But internationally, when people talk about kimono, it's always referring to this. Right?
Because Japanese do it too. Because nowadays Japanese call this kimono too. I've never heard a young girl saying, oh, my kimono. They say, oh, my fuku, clothes. They wouldn't, it's like really elderly Japanese say kimono for all of their clothes, like pajamas, whatever they have at home.
It's a little bit, we talked recently with a sake brewer, and sake used to be the only liquor in Japan for a long time. And sake
and
was
that's
sake.
Why Osake is.
And now it's Nihonshu because this is the Japanese sake for an audience, and sake became basically all of the alcohol. But ultimately, you were saying it's fashion. So there's not that many rules, except perhaps for special occasions, like a wedding, a coming of age ceremony, or things like that. Do those vary greatly from the kimono you wear every day?
So in kimono, what is really interesting, what I love in kimono is that the shape of each kimono is the same. So when you look at it, if you just send me a black on white illustration of a kimono, I will not be able to tell even if it's a men's or a women's kimono. I won't be able to know. I don't know. But in kimono, to actually be able to make clear that this is a fancy dress, and this is actually like jeans, you can wear this every day, and this is actually like your PJs. It's the fiber and the pattern you have on it. That is going to tell you what it is in the end. And we call this formalities in kimono dressing, and that's really hard to learn and study. But the easy rule is if you go to a wedding, you wear silk, and you want to have an obi that has gold and silver in it. That's like the easiest ruling. And after that, you have to get in the nitty-gritty details.
Where you have to dive into the rabbit hole if you want to kind of get a better understanding.
Yeah.
Although this is an everyday dress, I feel like nowadays when you walk around Japan, it's mostly only worn for special occasions. You'll see young couples wear it maybe for a photo shoot when they're walking around Kyoto or for a matsuri, but you will rarely see people that choose to actively wear this as their everyday garment. Why did it go, so to say, like out of fashion?
There are many, many reasons that played into it. First of all, the war. A lot of kimono were sold after the war because people were poor. Another big thing is that the emperor after the war chose to not wear kimono anymore because Western clothing is cheaper in production, but you need way less fabric. So the emperor did a decision to not wear kimono anymore and only pull it out to special occasions. So that's one of the reasons too. Another thing is just it's really impractical. I wear kimono every day. If people say kimono is practical, no, it's really impractical. You have to you have to work around it. Like there, for example, are kimono trousers. They're historically accurate, but you can put on trousers over your kimono to make it more convenient. So it's just super easy things like that. And then entering the new era, like let's say the 1980s and 90s, people just completely forgot how to wear a kimono because no one wore it anymore. So this is why it's out of fashion. No one can do it. It's not in your blood. No one can. Just because you're Japanese doesn't mean you can put on a kimono. You need someone to show you how to do it and to properly learn it and perfect those skills. Then you have, as I already said, after the war, no one was wearing it anymore. It's like Western clothing made it so much easier to live a modern life.
Are there sort of new fashion trends coming that are trying to reinvigorate this kind of interest into traditional Japanese clothing, wafuku, but making them more practical for everyday life that are kind of...
So what I noticed recently, this making it more practical thing is what you see a lot in 60s and 70s magazines. They were trying to put out a lot of new designs of how kimono were worn, how to make them more easy to wear, etc., etc. But we're out of that trend already. Right now, the kimonos the people try to protect it as a garment as it is. So it's a tiny bit on a pedestal already. We're not trying to make it easier to put on that much anymore. We have like 2-piece kimono and stuff like that. What I see as a trend that is really coming is we're finally getting away from only silk kimono. We had only silk kimono for decades because yes, people were allowed to wear silk already. So finally, everyone wanted to wear silk. Mm-hmm. And now we notice that silk is not a good fiber for Japan because it's so hot and humid here almost throughout the year. So we have this big trend in going back to cotton and rami kimono, which also shows a big trend on going back to fudangi. Fudangi is casual kimono, wearing kimono every day. We see a big shift from not only special occasions anymore, also just, I want to be fancy today and meet my friend in a cafe, I'm going to wear a kimono trend. So this is a big trend I'm seeing recently. And some of the best selling producers right now are cotton producers and rami producers, like a kimono wearing today. So you can be comfortable in your kimono whenever you wear it.
Interesting. Yeah. I feel like for men, it's maybe a little bit easier. And recently we were in this like in a kimono shop. And the salesperson got me to try on a haori. And I felt, well, this is very comfortable. I can just wear it as a jacket in fall when it gets colder and wear it to the office without needing, to put on layers and layers. I just put it on as a jacket. Is it easier for men to kind of utilize these traditional samue or haori jackets than maybe women who have the different layers and the obi that go into it?
Definitely, yeah. I also do recommend if someone wants to do a mix of Western clothing and Japanese clothing, I do recommend male items. They're so much easier to deal with. And the big issue is like the back collar, actually. You can see that my back collar is super low on the back here. Yeah. And because you can wear it like that, the kimono is made a specific way so it sits nice like this and doesn't creep up. Mm-hmm. And mei's kimono doesn't, because a mei kimono is just worn against your neck. And this is a big difference in dressing. That's why it's a tiny bit harder to put on over Western clothing that doesn't have supporting. I have in here some supporting plastic, so it actually sits nice here on my shoulder and stays lowered on the back. You don't need that in male dressing, so it's easier to just put it on over your Western clothes. But mei kimono is super dandy. I love it. They have sometimes super nice paintings inside of the haori. I didn't know the one you tried.
Yeah, it does have some nice fabric sewn into it. Kind of, I don't know. It's a very nice color. It's brown on the outside and green in the inside a little bit.
And recently there's this trend of turning them inside out and actually showing the inside of the haori too.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll have to first wear it once and then see if I'm able to do this in both ways.
Yeah.
Now, you went into learning kimono because you wanted to teach. You kind of had this idea already. How did you set up your kind of online classes and are able to teach to people all over the world something that is very physical because you have to put it on when you are actually not with your teachers in the same room?
So I noticed that I don't have to be there, actually. Kimono classes, when they're physical, your teacher does a lot for you. and you go back home. I remember that after my very first class with my host mother, after she helped me tying the otaiko on the back and we were finished, because she basically did it on the back for me. I couldn't remember anything. So I noticed that in online classes, we're just cutting out we just gonna do juban until otaiko until the very end. If you can do it or not, I don't care. I just started to really cut it down into tiny, tiny baby steps of classes. So you start with a class where we only learn how to put on the juban and then the kimono. And then if you're good with that, we can move on to also obi classes and do juban and kimono and obi in one class. So it actually works quite well, but it took me very long to figure also out how to do that and not like force my students to do everything until the very end. It took a lot of adjustment. With the online classes itself, I was just setting up a calendar and was opening up. I did have some following on Instagram by that time and YouTube. So it was filling up quite well at that time, but it was so hard to figure out how to present stuff online.
Basically, make your own curriculum after you've spent time diving into various rabbit holes.
Yeah, and then usually, as I said, your teacher is from the first class on, is just gonna force you from beginning to end of putting on a kimono, and if your teacher is there, they're just gonna help you out. But in online classes, we can't do that. So how to make the curriculum was taking some time. I think I finally settled in 2 years ago, finally. And I think now it's working really, really well. My students
You have your students, you start to have your regulars and new students kind of joining in.
Yeah.
We talked about a few kind of maybe misconceptions people have about kimono, whether it's the word itself and others. Do you notice anything that maybe your students or sometimes people that are watching the content you put online on YouTube are asking about that come up again and again and again, but that are not accurate?
We talked a tiny bit about color earlier, that there is this misconception that every color has a meaning in kimono. It doesn't. It seriously doesn't. It's also not necessarily tied to a season. That's like, it's just a color. There are colors that have a meaning. For example, the color red is what you're supposed to wear to your 60th birthday because you've been 5 times through your Chinese zodiac. So they have this red vest they put on for the 60th birthday. But just because you're wearing a red kimono doesn't mean you're 60, you know? So there are like, some colors do have a meaning, but not all of them actually do. And especially not in daily kimono. That's a misconception I run across a lot. I think the only color that is accurate not to wear on a daily basis is just black, because it's mourning. mourning.
So when after someone passes away.
Exactly. So you should not wear a morning gown, for sure. And full white is nowadays also in Japan very often bridal dress. So full white and full black are the only 2 things you should probably not do. And besides that, it doesn't have a very deep meaning.
One of the common mistakes you're pointing, so no full black, no full white, is also like the right over left, left over right. Kind of.
But you know what? That's actually an interesting topic. If it happens to you, I'm like, girl, I've done it too. We've all done it once. Actually, I don't know if you know that. Why? Do you know why we wear left over right?
I think the other one is used for burials, isn't it? But I don't know why the reason.
Yes and no. The actual reason is it was a law passed in 719 that ruled that you have to wear your kimono left over right because the Chinese are doing it.
Okay.
It was the Japanese emperor had this law, so we are not the barbarians. We are a country trying to be even with China. And actually in Japan at that time, right over left was way more common. And they got rid of it by law. We do know that. So nowadays when people go like, that's what dead people wear, I find that a tiny bit mean to say because it was a law. So we do this because 719 someone told us to. That's why we're actually doing it.
Interesting. I had no idea. I was always under the impression as well that it's kind of disrespectful because it's only used in a case of burial.
Yeah, it's not disrespectful. It's not disrespectful. It's a mistake, but it's not disrespectful. So if it happens, It's okay. In Germany, we say put the sponge over it.
There's one piece of the garment that we actually haven't talked about, and I'm just thinking about it now because I recently watched one of your videos, which is the shoes you wear with the
Zori
kimono.
and Geta. Oh.
Yes. And I have a question because I noticed Geta usually have a kind of the rope in the center.
Yeah.
The touch point is in the center of the shoes. Whereas if you take a Western flip-flop, usually it's a little bit more in the inner side so that it aligns with your bigger thumb and the finger. But not with a Geta. So I feel like when you wear a Geta, your foot is not straight on the shoe. Or is
Okay,
it?
I'm just checking my own. It's straight on. It's straight.
Or maybe just my feet are not straight then.
So there's a reason why it's put in the center.
Okay.
So you can change left and right after a while. So the sole is gonna
Kind of stay even?
Exactly.
Oh.
So that's what you're supposed to do with Geta. You have to switch them after a specific point. If you notice, oh my gosh, my sole is so uneven, you switch them.
That makes sense.
Kimono is so amazingly sustainable, you won't believe it.
The mystery solved. But not comfortable at the beginning, I thought, for me.
So I don't like wearing them barefoot either. It's really uncomfortable. I do second that. But wearing them with the right socks, the right tabi, does make a big difference. I have a friend who runs a company that does custom-made tabi, and they are supposed to support your feet in a specific way. And nowadays we don't do this anymore because mass production, same with tabi. But in the past, tabi were made to people's feet to actually fit. So they did a shift back to make it as it was supposed to be made. So they make custom-made tabi. I can walk like kilometers in them and I will be comfortable. It's gonna be so good. And that made the difference for me. That is the most comfortable thing, is the socks you have on is gonna make the difference.
So the socks make the difference over the shoe.
Yeah.
Good to know. So for people interested in getting Geta, make sure you get the right socks.
Get the right socks. Don't get the ones that are stretchy. Make sure they have some support, and they have quite a thick fabric as a sole, so it's way more comfortable to walk in it. And when we talk about Zori itself, make sure they are fitted enough to your feet so they follow your feet along the whole movement of walking and don't flap along like flip-flops. Actually, they should be fitted like shoes. So when you lift up your foot, it just follows along with you, not using any strength to lift it up with your toes. That's also something that hurts very often. But too tight Geta hurt as well, so it's a tiny bit of, you need a sweet spot.
When you embarked on this kimono journey, did you think you'd be where you are today a few years ago? Teaching online internationally and kind of becoming a licensed teacher, having gone through all these rabbit holes?
So I wanted to become a licensed teacher, but I didn't want to become a professional, like doing this as a job for money. I just always figured I'm going to be a translator somewhere in a bigger company and just do my stuff. And yeah, looking back now, it's just like, it's so weird what happened. It's like, I can't believe it myself. My husband says that a lot too. He's like, because he knows me for all of this time too. He's like, in the past, you always said you only want to do this as a hobby. It's like, I know.
And here it is, our house full of kimono.
Yeah, it's like, exactly. The house would still be filled with kimono. But it's like, exactly going down those rabbit holes made me super knowledgeable in very specific areas of kimono. And that's why I obviously have a lot of knowledge to offer. And I'm always 100% sure if that is true myself, but it's like so weird that this is actually happening and it's working out and I'm doing this as a job. It's like, thank you, everyone.
If someone is interested in getting started out, naturally, they can come to your YouTube channel, which we will link down in the description, and check out your website, take your classes. But are there, where do you start with this? It seems like such a large topic. If someone is now interested in, I want to learn more, is there like a famous book that kind of sums it up? Or is it, you just have to get started somewhere and spend a lot of time exploring?
So I don't recommend any books because I cannot. Because I've never read any books in German or English about kimono. And I don't want to recommend anything I've never read myself. Japanese books, if you can read and write Japanese, you can just go to a Japanese bookstore and get some magazines or books there. They're always fairly well put together. I do recommend to just start scrolling on the internet. Do not 100% believe what everyone tells you, maybe also not what I tell you. But just start to read up things. And then just Google a tiny bit more, and just go down the tiny rabbit holes as I do.
I think we've used that word so many times today.
Yeah, it's like today's a rabbit hole day.
Yeah.
But that's what kimono is. It's so specific in every single area. And I have to mention that every kimono teacher has a different field of expertise. Mine is historical dressing, down to junishitoe and sewing. And I do know a lot of weavers, so I really love how the fabric itself is produced. That's like my expertise. But like other kimono teachers have a complete different field of expertise. I'm, for example, really bad at dressing people in a modern way. Mm-hmm. I can't do it, it looks good, but it's not as professional as some other people I know. They're amazing people, they're gonna dress you stunning in a modern furisode. I'm never gonna be that good. It's not my field of expertise. That is why you just find something in kimono that really, really interests you, and then you just start to go down the rabbit hole.
It's good to know that when you get into this, look for the expert you need. And like you said, just don't listen to everything you find, but listen to the people that kind of really matter in what you want to learn. From your field of expertise and your knowledge of kimono, is there anything else that we haven't really gone into today that you think might be important for someone to know or to hear about, or how we covered the general overview of the kimono?
So what I really want to point out, kimono is less intimidating than it sounds. I think people listening to this and think, oh my gosh, there's so many items. There's so many steps to put this on. There's so many different kimonos. That's the charm of it. You don't need to master it in one day. And it's the same with sewing. I always say the same thing with sewing too. If you like it, start now, not tomorrow, now. Like even if you just scroll on online shops and find a kimono you really like and buy it, that's already want to start, you know. Just start wherever you want to start, and don't think of the idea of putting on a kimono would be so nice, but it's so intimidating to start. This business is way less strict than people think. I hope that came across.
Yeah, definitely for me.
And it's like way less. It's a way less stiff way of thinking. And if you meet those people because they're there too, just ignore them, because there are people like me too. Like, just start your journey. Find a kimono and start it. That's the only thing I can say.
I think this is perfect to end our conversation. And I hope we will get a few people enthusiastic about it and interested into learning more.
I really hope so too.
I definitely want to try to explore more for myself if I can find a way to incorporate these garments into my daily life comfortably. But thank you so much, Billy, for coming all the way to Osaka and sharing your knowledge. We will make sure to send everyone over to you so they can ask more questions and kind of hear from the experts and learn more about kimono.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. This was Unpacking Japan, and we will be back again next week. Bye. Are you looking for another podcast episode to listen to next? If you like the one you just listened to, I'm sure you'll also enjoy the one that I've selected and linked in the description down below. Go check it out.